In this particular lecture, let's go ahead and let's learn how we could calculate the sum of the expenses across all the dates. So the way in which we are going to calculate the sum is, let's say on this date, which is 22nd November, we have made these two expenses, and the expense for that particular date should be combined and should be shown up together as the total expense for that particular date. So let's learn how to calculate that. So whenever we have to calculate total, we usually go inside the views.py file, which is this file right up over here. And in this, just as we have calculated the total sum up over here, so the total sum was for all the expenses. But here we want to get all the expenses, but we only want to add expenses as per the date on which they are made. So let's go ahead and let's implement that logic up over here. So first of all, I'll get the data. So I would say data is going to be equal to nothing but expense dot objects dot filter, and here we are basically going to get all the values, and then I'm going to say get the values on the basis of date. So this is actually going to filter on the basis of date, and once we have these values or the date values, we then go ahead and order these values up by date. So along with filtering those values by date, I also want to order the values by the date. And here what we have done is that we have calculated the sum of all the expenses, that is, we have aggregated all the expenses. But here in this particular case, instead of aggregation, we want to perform annotation. And what annotation does is that it kind of filters up the expenses which we have made as per the date which we have. So here we say dot annotate, and then just as we have passed in sum here, I would do the same thing. So I would say I want to call this thing as sum, and I would say sum equals sum of the amount, because amount is actually the total expenses which we have made. So once we have this particular data, let's save it into some sort of other variable like daily sums. So instead of saying data, I would say daily sums, and now this actually becomes an object list, and let's see the kind of result we would get on actually printing up this object list. So I'll save this and let's print this thing up and say daily sums. So now let's hit the get request and see the kind of result we would get. So I have made a get request. Let's go to the terminal here. So if I go to the terminal here, as you can see, it kind of calculated the expenses made on those particular dates, and it has shown up those things as sum. Now the reason why this thing says sum here is because we have explicitly specified that we want to call it sum. In this particular case, in this one, it was showing up some other value name. Okay, so for the date 22nd November, the total which is showing up over here is this. So here, as you can see, we have date as 22nd November 2022, and the sum of the amount is $128,000, and that's actually correct. If you sum these values up, that's exactly what you get. And it has also calculated the sum for these as well, but as they only have one expenses, it kind of shows these values themselves. So now once we have these daily sum values, let's go ahead and display these daily sum values inside of a table inside our index.html template. So in order to do that, I would go to index.html. I will go right where the div for this one ends, and I'll create another div. This is also going to be flex. So div class is flex. And in this, I would create one div which is going to span half of the width, because we only want to show the 30-day sums on half of the width of this website. So here I would say this is going to be w-1/2, which means it spans half. I want to add a shadow LG. I want to add a margin of 10. And in this, I would again go ahead, create another div. This is going to be flex again. So div class is going to be flex. This is going to be flex wrap. Let's add some space X as 40, and let's make the font to be bold. Let's make the padding X to be 20, and let's make the padding Y to be 5. So once we have this, now in this, here we are going to add a span tag, and this is going to say something like past 30 days some expenses. That's it. Now once we have this, or once we basically have this header, After this, I would have an HR tag, and after the HR tag, I would create another div up over here, and that div is actually going to contain the 30-day table. So I would say div, let's give it an ID as, let's say 30-day table. We have not assigned a class for this one. And in this particular 30-day table, we basically want to display all the expenses which we have gotten from here, which is daily sums. So to get daily sums, I first have to pass in daily sums as context over here. And we have passed in a lot of context objects here. So let's pass one more. So daily sums is daily sums. So once we have passed this thing in, now let's go ahead and get the daily sum from the daily sums array which we have. So here, in order to get that, I would add a for loop. So for daily sum in daily sums, I would say, and I would end for here. So end for, and in this we will create a div, and the class for this one is going to be flex wrap, and I want the padding on the x-axis to be 20, padding on the y-axis to be 5. And then inside this I would add a span. So we are going to do just as we have done up over here. And inside this particular span, I want to get the daily sums date and display the date first. So I would say daily sum dot date. And after this, or right after this div ends, I have to create another div. So we will be having two divs here. And even this div is going to have a class of flex and flex wrap as well. And I would add a span class. I would make the text to be green with a shade of 500, and after showing up the date, I want to show up the sum in this case. So here I'll copy this, paste it up over here, and simply replace this with sum. So let's see the kind of result this kind of provides. So if I go back here, hit refresh, if I go down here, as you can see, now we have the expenses as well as the dates here, which is the past 30-day sum expenses. It's kind of misaligned because we have not added padding and margin here. So px is 20 and py is 5. Okay, so once we have fixed that, now let's head back here, hit refresh. Now the expenses are shown up properly over here. You could also add a $sign here. And another thing which could be done here is that for these sums which you have, you could humanize them by adding a filter, and you could say something like int, comma. Go back. Now you have the expenses displayed up over here along with the respective commas. So once we have this leftmost table, which kind of displays the past 30-day sum, we could now go ahead and create a table on the right hand side which shows the sum of amount spent across all these categories. But even before that, let's test if this actually works. So I'll add an expense here. For example, let's say I would say pizza. Let's say the amount is just $20. Let's say this falls in the food category. I would add that. So now we have pizza and food here, and that expense is added for today, which adds up to $20. Now I could go ahead and add another expense like coffee. Let's say this is also a food expense. Let's say that is $15. Add that. Go back here. As you can see, now the total shows up to be $35 for today. That means this is working absolutely fine. Now in the next lecture, let's actually sum up the expenses on the basis of their categories and display them up over here on the right hand side table. So let's do that in the next one.